IDs in the parking lot. I haven't heard from, oh, the curriculum people must still be in there.
Yeah, they're all in. Who's not going to be here? Oh, I'm sorry. Is it Meadard or McDonald?
Am I too far over? This is where they put me, but I can move down. Let's get rid of this chair.
Principal Thomas. Oh, okay.
I don't see Menard here.
Okay. I did read that.
A mic is not.
Oh,
I feel very alone over here.
where are you going, Bruce?
Principal.
7-Eleven, Bruce. It's just legal stuff.
I'll be back, right?
At 7:12, we will call this meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Best pledge we've ever had.
I know. Thank you for all that enthusiasm. We will now need a little peace and quiet. We will now start with Spotlight, which we start all of our business meetings with. And our secretary, Brian Meek, will introduce this meeting's Spotlight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the large crowd. It's your enthusiasm very well appreciated. So tonight's Spotlight is Columbus students sow seeds for a hands-on approach. First graders at Columbus Magnet School are getting their hands dirty while learning about science and community through a partnership with Fodor Farm in Norwalk. To learn the parts of a plant and bring science curriculum to life, last year's first grade students maintained a garden plot on the farm. The project also aligned with the themes of the annual Columbus First Grade Market, where students sell fruits and veggies and learn civics lessons on creating bonds with the community. The connection to Fodor Farm has continued to grow as Columbus partnered with the Silvermine Arts Center. Students learned techniques and painted guarded people statues under the tutelage of Silvermine Arts Center artist and educator. Several times during the year, students explored color, tint, blending, and brushstrokes, among other things, to create beautiful statues on display at Fodor Farm. They also wrote poems about people, animals, and nature to hang from garden statues. Last year, Columbus was approached by the Norwalk Tree Alliance to be part of a pilot tree school. Visits to Fodor Farm in the fall, winter, and spring provided students with valuable and fun lessons about trees that aligned with next-generation science standards. Students had the opportunity to plant saplings, measure trees, compare mature trees with their offspring, note shadows in each season, learn about mushrooms, meet an expert on bees and cross-pollination, and more. This coming year, Brookside School will also be participating in the tree school. Plans for both schools include creating relationships with professionals from the community. On the first field visit next week, students will meet with a landscape architect. The Norwalk Board of Education would like to thank the Norwalk Tree Alliance, Fodor Farm, Friends of Fodor Farm, the Care of Trees, Sound Mushrooms, Silvermine Arts Center, and Norwalk Recs and Parks for a collaborative effort to bring learning alive for all our students. We would like to recognize Columbus students who participated in the program, many who are here this evening. We would also like to thank Columbus Principal Thomas and the Columbus staff for working towards this integrated project-oriented learning opportunity. Thank you to the Columbus first grade team. Now, if you will, I would like to have Mrs. Emoff and Mrs. Kaler's first grade class come up and be recognized for their achievement. If you would circle around to your right. Thanks, Brenda. Congratulations. Nice T-shirts. Congratulations.
Well done. I like
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Well done. Good job.
Good
Congratulations.
job,
Congratulations.
Riley.
Congratulations.
Are any of these yours?
Hi, little Girl Scout.
They're up there.
Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Well done.
Well done. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Well done. Nice to see you too. Nice to see you.
Congratulations.
Good job, of course.
Congratulations. Yeah, you want to move them more?
Down in front.
Yeah, move them back over that way so that everybody can get a picture.
Nature's, this is a crazy way of doing it, but nature's special. It's, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
They changed from the spring to the fall.
Yes.
Great job, guys. Next, after everyone sits down, could we have Miss Braddock and Mrs. Stewart's first grade class please come up? Well done. Good job. Congratulations. Good job. Thank you very much. Good job.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Good job.
Thanks for being here tonight. Where's Bedard? Where's
Yeah, you're alone.
I'm there. Well, not.
Thomas?
That's what I was. All right.
Last but not least, Principal Thomas. Come run the gauntlet.
I'm just a money guy. It's all about the teachers. And Tree Line, Andy, and
Thank you, Columbus School, and keep up the good work, and we look forward to Brookside joining ranks with you. And that concludes tonight's Spotlight, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, Columbus students. Oh, thank you.
Sarah?
Oh, Sarah?
She has to bring her kids back.
She has to leave.
Shot clock going. Oh, look look at Tom changing his point of view.
Who's that?
Hamilton.
Oh, yeah, what's he doing?
Is that Tom?
Yeah. Oh, sitting on the other side.
That's the normal crowd. I'm all set.
You're going to do public comments, right?
Yeah. Oh, okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. We'll now move on to public comments. Tonight's public comments, we have first on the list, Lee Reeves. Please step up to the podium, announce your name, address, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Leah Reeves, 51 Winding Lane. So tonight I'm here representing the now 344 working families that have signed the petition regarding the school calendar that was voted on in August. As you are aware, I sent a letter addressed to the entire board on Friday, September 13th, requesting that the calendar be put on a future agenda, allowing parent input from the significant number of families that the school calendar changes have affected. I'm here to restate the request in the public comment that we are requesting that the spring break be moved back to April, the February break during the full President's Week be added back as a full week break, and the school year run to a later date in order to match up when the other area schools actually finish, which is also when the full day camps begin at the end of June. We're asking that the school calendar not be so vastly different from the other surrounding towns in which we rely on childcare. I was told that once this board votes on something, they will not bring it back up. I do hope that this board cares enough about the hardship this decision will create. I hope that the board cares enough to receive input from the working families in this community. And I hope that the board cares enough to bring it back up for discussion, public comment, and another vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mary Jordan. Three minutes, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Jordan, 9 Mott Avenue. I just wanted to thank the board publicly for the successful conclusion of our negotiations with a mediated contract settlement. The Norwalk Federation of Teachers, in a special meeting this past week, did ratify that agreement, and we turn it to you for your approval or action, whatever is necessary. The teachers are among the most dedicated employees in the city of Norwalk. We are committed to making the best use of every tax dollar and implementing educational sound practices to the very best of our abilities. Thank you.
Thank you for the good news, Mary. And that concludes our sign-up list for public comments. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Please step forward to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Hi, Rachel Precious, 23 Fitch Street. I wanted to touch on the ordinance on plastic straws and stirrers. Good evening. I'm Rachel Precious, Norwalk resident, conservation biologist, shellfish farmer, and small business owner. I'm also the vice chair of the Connecticut chapter of the Surfrider Foundation, a international nonprofit working to protect our oceans, waves, and beaches. And I'd like to speak on behalf of our chapter and thank the committee and Common Council for working to reduce plastic pollution in our environment. One way that Surfrider works to protect our oceans and coastlines is by hosting monthly beach cleanups throughout the state. We sort and weigh all of our findings and submit the data to a national database where information can be accessed by the public. In regards to plastic stirrers and straws, while they're not the most significant source of the global plastic waste problem, they're highly visible, relatable, and avoidable. For most people, straws and stirrers are unnecessary. making them some of the easiest single-use plastic products to target for reduction. We commend the Council for advancing ordinances on these items. While Surfrider believes a total ban on straws is the most effective method for protecting our marine environment, we fully support the ordinance as written with Ask First as a first step. We also applaud the efforts of the Council to accommodate persons identifying as living with disabilities. And thank you for including stiff penalties for noncompliance, while also being fair to businesses in issuing written warnings on first offense. I would also like to thank you on a more personal note. As an ocean farmer, I see firsthand the impacts of plastic pollution every day. Norwalk has made an incredible effort already in helping keep our waters and coastline free from harmful pollution by passing bans on plastic bags and more recently EPS foam. Straws and stirrers are the next step, and it's inspiring to have our local government not only on board with such ordinances, but leading the way. Your support and initiative does not go unnoticed. As a millennial, I, like so many of my peers, value a community's stance on environmental issues. While straws and stirrers may seem like a small issue, taking any action against plastic pollution speaks volumes and makes a big impression. Your efforts make Norwalk stand out as a forward-thinking city, one that understands the value of sustainability for the community, for local businesses, and for the planet. While I've only recently moved to Norwalk, I already feel like this is my home, and I look forward to working together as we continue to create a plastic-free future. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there are no other members of the public who wish to speak, that will conclude public comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. We will now move to the superintendent's report. He has 4 topics to cover.
Thank you, Mr. Barbas. I want to start with the CSDE assignment of Norwalk in special education. I'm just going to distribute a letter that I received from the Special Education Bureau at the state. Some of you may be aware that the state has a system for rating special education programs. It's very similar to our state accountability plan for general education. It's based upon a lot of the criteria in the IDEA law. And you may recall that in 2015-16, when we initiated the CREC audit, we began the Special Ed Development Fund and our whole effort to improve special education, that we were not in the meets requirements category. We were in a lower category. Last year, we did meet the requirements, which is the top category. And we did again this year. So now realizing that this was not a fluke of 1 year, we thought that it would be appropriate to report on this. You may not be as familiar with the criteria of this as you are the state accountability plan. So I've asked Yvette Gorovich if she would spend a couple of minutes reviewing this with you. But again, I think it's another indicator of an improved approach to special education in Norwalk.
Thank you, Dr. Adamowski, and I've invited Stacy Hyland-Gontola to join me. She is our Director of Pupil Services. So, Stacy. Hi. So this evening I'm going to very briefly summarize the Special Education Annual Performance Report from Connecticut State Performance Plan.
You should have these slides at your places.
So, as Dr. Adamowski said, this is a requirement of IDEA that the states report annually on several indicators. There are 4 categories. You'll note the 4 categories up on the screen, and the meets requirement is the highest category and requires no corrective action, which of course is music to our ears, no corrective action. Stacy, do you want to speak about some historical information?
Sure. If we look at our 2015-16, we were in the category of needs assistance. And I want to thank the compliance monitors, which we put in place around that time, to really help us as we went into a school year 16-17, to help us monitor the IEPs and to look at the compliance that our IEPs have done, specifically around our timeliness and our timelines, and staying within the timelines that the state asks us for the data.
So I'm going to very briefly go through some of the highlights of the requirements. The first set of data that the state is required to report is third grade performance of students with disabilities. It's the grade that the state has chosen to report to the federal government. If you look at the past 3 years, you'll see shifts. These are index scores on state assessments at Smarter Balance Grade 3 ELA. I also want to point out that we exceeded the state target and slightly exceeded the state average. So, that's good news on performance. The other indicators that are reported to the federal government are here. They talk about suspension data, disproportionality of classification based upon subgroups, disproportionality of specific classifications based on subgroups, compliance with timelines, as Stacy already spoke to, transitions of IEPs from birth to 3, that was a major area of concern for us, development of timely transition goals for our students turning 18 to 21, soon to be tax-paying employed citizens of our great city. And then the general supervision. So if there is a complaint or an area that needs corrective action, the general supervision that we put in place meets the highest standard that says we have corrected whatever needs to be corrected in a timely manner, and the state puts a year in their report to the federal government. And then timely and accurate reporting, which was a problem.
Eva, can you scroll the slides up to that point?
She is.
I was
Oh,
there.
you are, okay.
I'm right there. So let me give a little bit of a data dive. We met the targets in all of the first 3 areas. I have to say that disproportionality is a national concern. We briefly discussed about boys being more highly identified. We know racial discrepancies and other high needs indices are a national concern, and you'll see in a moment a statewide concern. So I'm delighted to monitor that progress, to know that we are not showing disproportionality. Number 11 is one of the requirements. We are in substantial compliance. Stacy, you want to talk a little bit about that?
So number 11 looks at the timeliness of completing initial evaluations for students within the 45-day timeline that the state has laid out. So this is only for initial referrals. Last year we had just over 300 initial referrals that came into the district. So looking at a 97.14% compliance rate. So we're looking at a potential of 3 to 4 students that fell outside of that timeline of over 300 evaluations that were completed. Of course, we are moving toward reaching that 100%, but we did increase 2 percentage points over the previous year.
The transition IEPs from our birth to 3 met target at 100%. The transition goals, you'll note in 15-16, we were nearing compliance. We have met the target, and I do need to recognize our transition coordinator, Jess Ireland, and that whole team has done remarkable work. The general supervision of replying to concerns, complaints, compliance issues. In 15-16, we did not meet criteria, and for the past 2 years, we have met that criteria. And then the timely and accurate reporting. I do also want to share with you some comparisons between how we are on these indicators and how our comparison districts, both within the DIRG and within our cities within the state. So as you can see, that third grade Smarter Balance, you see where we're falling. We outperformed everyone in the DIRG except for one district.
Okay, you're on.
I'm on? Okay, great.
And also of significant concern is the classification rate. This is 17-18 data reported in 18-19. You will recall at the retreat, we are looking at a slight increase to 14.3% for next year's reporting, but again, significantly under the classification rates. This is a gentle balance. We do not want to over-identify students who require interventions through SRBI, and at the same time, we want to be sure that we are identifying those children early on. Please note that this is K through 12 classification rates. Yes, sir.
Isn't that, Yvette, isn't that kind of, I mean, I understand what you're saying, it's a difficult balance, but isn't it kind of bad that we're that much lower than everybody else?
Actually not. It talks to the success of the interventions. So the state average is 15%. I'm going to show you on the next slide how the state got there. Nationally, it's 12%. So Connecticut has a higher classification rate than comparable states. Certainly between 12 and 15% is a good national average, a good place for a state to be in, good place for a district to be in. Once you get up to 19, 20, 21%, it speaks to failing rates of general education and the identification of kids who may be casualties of inappropriate instruction in the core curriculum, in the Tier 1, and in the SRBI.
Okay, Bruce?
Yeah, some people may argue the pendulum has swung too far in one direction, but historically, the problem, huge problem, has been the over-identification of children, putting them in special ed. They really didn't belong in special ed. It was, as Yvette said, a failure of the educational system, and they were just removed from classrooms. And that intensified as pressure increased to raise test scores where accountability started to come into play. And what you would find is disproportionate numbers of students who, for whatever reason, primarily African-American males over the years, would be in special ed, and for no apparent reason. When I first came on the board in 2005, on my first stint, we were being monitored by the state at that point for a disproportionate number of African-American males who were referred to special education, who had no business being in special ed. It was a variety of other factors that were happening in the classrooms that were not being addressed. So my feeling is if you're under 20%, you're in pretty good shape. You're in pretty solid shape. And this is really getting to where probably nationally where it would fit in about 15% of the population. So I think it's a good trend.
So just to build on that, I think, we had this discussion several years ago when we were implementing Tier 2 interventions for the first time, right? So when you look at some of these rates, Meriden at 19%, Waterbury at 19%, I mean, what that suggests is that there's an absence of Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. And so a teacher seeking help for a child has nowhere else to go except to refer them to special ed. And that is generally a life sentence. And so, try to avoid that except when it is necessary. Barbara?
I'm wondering if the ad hoc SPED committee could have a report on our child find activities, and also looking at that cut of third grade. Are we identifying kids before third grade, or are we identifying them later? When is that happening for us? What's our system? Are we finding everybody that we're responsible by law to find? So that, I think, would be very helpful to.
And again, this is K-12. Our early childhood percentages are higher for a variety of reasons. And the good news is we're really monitoring the exit criteria, particularly from our early childhood interventions. If we're doing the right job in early intervention, then we get the outcomes. Kids are prepared to go on to kindergarten with less support and supports that are available through our system. I also wanted to share with you how we compare to the larger cities in keeping with the promise to make Norwalk the best city in the state. You see again, we are outperforming all of the cities, and you see the classification rates as they exist. So next steps, excellence is this journey that we're on. We're looking at decreasing out-of-school suspension rates. We can't educate our kids if they're not in our schools. And working with my colleagues in curriculum and instruction and in operations, this board is familiar with all of the interventions that we're putting in, from restorative practices to social and emotional learning, as well as increased behavioral supports and counseling supports in counseling redesign. We fared really well in our placements with regard to placing students with disabilities in general education. The target was 68%, and 73.2% of our students are in fully integrated settings. I want to thank the board for their support of our NEST program, our co-teaching programs that allow intensive interventions in the general education classroom. We're also looking to decrease placements in separate schools and residential placements, and again, the board knows the impact of the special education fund that allowed us to do program development and reduce that stream that was going out of district. You're aware of the Norwalk SPED PAC and our goal of increasing positive supported parent involvement. We're monitoring those classification rates. We've already spoken about that. Continue to monitor the eligibility timelines. Stacy, you want to talk about your work with regard to alternative assessment recommendations?
So Connecticut has the Connecticut Alternative Assessment for students who do not take the typical assessment. We've been working with the individual schools to make sure that we're identifying the students that meet the state criteria and are really eligible for that alternative assessment. So that includes working with the various school teams at both the school level and bigger at the district level with the supervisors in terms of making sure that we're monitoring all the assessments that the students are taking and that students are taking the correct assessment.
We need to increase the participation rates, grades in the standardized testing. Grades 3 through 8 exceeded the standard, the state met standard. Grade 11 we need to increase, and we look at that as just careful monitoring and ensuring that we're providing the appropriate test accommodations to ensure full access, particularly to the high stakes test in grade 11. And then the last is really the focus of our work and what I've waited 2 years to have a serious discussion about, moving away from timeline compliance and the narrowness of the four corners of an IEP and move into improvement in proficiency and outcomes for kids. In grades 3 through 8, we met the standard for math. We need to go far beyond the state standard that's been set for students with disabilities in ELA and in grade 11 outcomes of standardized testing. And that is where the staff, the supervisors, will be focusing our intention of improving teaching and learning and outcomes for kids. So I leave you with this thought. My dream of an integrated school district, that diversity is having a seat at the table, and inclusion is having a voice at that table, and belonging is assuring that that voice is heard, and reminding our staff that we need to listen even when the student's still voice is yet to be heard. And I leave you with that thought. Thank you for your support.
All right.
Thanks, Yvette. So the rate that you had on slides 6 and 7, or 7 and 8, that suggests...
The classification rates?
Yeah, that suggests roughly 1,600 children that are classified right now.
Our K-12 numbers are a little over 1,600, you're correct. Remember, this is 16-17 data.
Yeah.
Our
Down from like about 1,700?
The 1,700 number included our pre-K and our 18 to 21.
Okay.
So, and again, it's those dates are, that data is October 1st data, so it includes some graduates and not others. But the K-12, 17, 18 data is approximately 1,600.
Thank you. And just a comment for my colleagues. The city actually used to report the special ed enrollment data in its annual report. I mean, maybe Tom knows why we dropped that out of there, but it goes back to the 90s. And throughout the 90s into the mid-noughts, it was about 3 or 4%, about 300 or 400 kids, depending on the year. So I think everybody can appreciate how much this area has like exploded in the last 10 years. And thank you for your attention to it.
Thank you, Brian.
I would suggest that maybe that Norwalk has caught up to best practices, and that the best practices have evolved a great deal in the last few decades.
There's no comparison points, it's just Norwalk by itself.
Right, yes, Bruce.
Yeah, there's a budget lesson to be learned in this, and it's something we should really take to heart. I remember Tom Hamilton, Mayor Rilling, and I think met with Dr. Adamowski and Mike Lyons, and Brian, I'm not sure if you were there or working in the mayor's office, and I thought it was this is several years ago, I was on the council, and thought it was a discussion of the budget, just the budget, and they came in with a 3-page piece of paper, $3.6 million over 3 years. We looked at it, and I'm saying to myself, this was the first time, and after discussing it and moaning about it for like 20, 25 years, that a Board of Ed actually came in with an actual request, with a plan. And I think we were a little bit hesitant at first. We went through it. Mayor Rilling had the appropriate discussions, and we devised a plan to pay for it. But it just shows you, money well spent really pays for itself. It's a real great investment for the future of the city, and especially for these kids who are now being educated, many of whom are being educated in their home city, where they couldn't do that before. And it's just a lesson, sometimes being bold, even if there's a fairly decent price tag attached to it, that's the way to go. But you've got to do it in a rational way. You've got to implement it properly. You've got to monitor it. And we're seeing the results right here. So City side did a great job. I think the Board of Estimate and the council, the mayor's office, you guys came up with a great plan in 15 and 16, and here we are. This is really nice to hear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, here, sir.
You're spot on. When you come in with a good plan, it's a very easy decision to allocate the appropriate funding because you have a strategic plan in place with steps that are going to be taken to make sure that you achieve the goals that you're wanting to achieve. So very easy decision when that happens. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well done, Yvette. And team.
Yes, thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Yvette. I want to, the next item is the beginning of year enrollment report. Other years, I have had the opportunity to present a much more definitive report. This year, we have a fairly unique situation that we have been having students register since the first day of school, large numbers every day for the last 4 or 5 weeks. And we are, while it's tapering off a little, we are still continuing to register students. And these are primarily immigrant students who are arriving primarily from Nicaragua and Guatemala, staying with families or friends in Norwalk. They have established residency, but I think it outlines why the state does not take the official enrollment account until October 1, because we, like some other districts, will be in flux on this until that time. I want to point out some basics of this to you. If you look at page 2 of the report, you'll see that as of last Friday, when we had to cut this off in order to have a report for you for tonight, as of last Friday, we had 11,745 students. That's up approximately 100 students from our June 2019 monthly report. However, the next 2 pages are students that are on InfoSnap who have not been included in not yet been included in Power School, and then a smaller number, 22 students who are. Those are students that are pre-registered. They started on Monday or today, and they are in the Power School figure. The larger figure, the 127 students, are not. Some of those students are waiting for physicals and immunizations. And in many cases, our immigrant students are not able to get that outside of the services provided by the City Health Department. So the City Health Department put on extra staff this summer. They thought they were done. We had this fairly large influx of students, and that's why we have the backlog now, because these students have no other, or these families have no other place to get physicals and immunizations. So I discussed this with the mayor several days ago. He acted immediately. The health department has now put on additional staff in the form of nurse practitioners who can give the physicals and immunizations. So they have established a schedule as of today of September 23rd, 25th, and 26th for processing the physical exams and the immunizations and TB tests. So we hope to clear the deck on this by the end of the month. It may be necessary to do more of this in October, and we'll have to see. But we've never registered this late before, and again, we're appreciative of the city's efforts to support these families and to support the school system, which enables us to get these students into school as quickly as possible. So, on the ELL issue, we ended the year last year with 1,991 ELLs. If you, I'm sorry, that's what we have now. If you add another 150 students to that, we're up to 2,141. So there is going to be implications of this for our ELL services. Right now, we have been putting on additional sections at the high school for these students, and so far we've been able to do that with Title III funds. We are going to have to make some other adjustments in budget and in services, and you're aware that in November you're going to have a workshop on the revamping of our services, and basically this is taking the form of what do we do with this much larger group of students. We're projecting we're going to be at about 19%, pushing 20% of English language learners this year. If you look at, I don't know if my check marks came through.
Yeah,
or
they
not.
did.
They did,
Jefferson,
okay.
Kendall,
If you look at the schools that have a check mark next to them, those are schools that are at 25% or more English language learners. And you think about that for a minute, that's, you know, that's 1 out of every 4 students sitting in those classrooms is learning English. That, in our view, is too high a ratio for any school. And it is going to require us retooling not only our services, but, you know, some of the conditions for learning, you know, as we are attempting to demonstrate at Kendall with that project. And you could see the Kendall percentage is the highest in the district. This is where we are to start with. We'll have more accurate information in mid-October when we have the October 1 report. We're hoping that by that time, everybody will be registered and in. And again, we're having a backlog because of these late registrations. Students have been arriving heavily in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and again, they're dependent upon being able to get their physicals and vaccinations in order to enter school. We understand that this is happening in Stamford as well. 80% of all migration to Connecticut is in Fairfield County, and the two places where there's families and a good school system are in these two cities. So we're dealing with this. With all the rhetoric of the Trump administration regarding, keeping people at the border, it appears that many of these families have been sent out of the detention centers or released from them, and they are following their, paths to families or friends in other states.
Mayor Rowland?
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. And after our conversation last week, I reached out to Congressman Himes and spoke with him and said that it's time for some federal assistance to deal with some of these issues, because these young people are now in our city. We have to deal with this issue, and we have to deal with it appropriately. We have to provide an adequate education, but the cost is going to go through the ceiling. He suggested, he was on his way to Washington, and he said that he was going to look into the possibility of increasing the Title I funding that we might be eligible for. He also said that it looks like this is not only something for Stamford and Lower Fairfield County, it seems to be a national trend. And there needs to be a lot of things that need to happen in order to deal with this appropriately. And I certainly feel that the City of Norwalk and the Board of Education should be meeting on a regular basis to discuss this issue, making sure we have our arms around it, making sure that we're dealing with it in proper fashion. And as soon as I hear back from Congressman Himes, I'm also preparing a letter to Congressman Himes, Senators Murphy and Blumenthal, asking for their assistance. I also spoke with Mayor Martin today to get an idea, and they're up. He didn't really have a definitive number, but they're up about 300 or more. And Danbury, I read, is up 350. So it's a national thing and a thing that we have to deal with. So I just wanted to report that back, that Congressman Himes is going to get back to me with his thoughts, and when I send the letter out to the other congressional delegates, we'll see what we can do. But I think there's got to be some federal funding to help deal with this. This is not just a state issue anymore.
Julie?
Thank you. So I want to thank the mayor and the city for stepping up and really helping get the health clinics going and continuing to increase them so that we can get the students enrolled. I know the first priority is getting the students enrolled and processed through and into the system. I think it's also important as we start thinking about what is done besides language classes, what additional services these students and these families may need, especially depending on exactly how they got here, what trauma they may have experienced. And so I know in October we have a workshop on the upcoming counseling recommendations on the counseling redesign, but this is somewhat of a pressing, urgent issue in making sure that these students are able to transition, not knowing some students may have had formal schooling in their home country, some students may have had zero formal schooling. So what that transition process can look like, especially in our elementary schools where we don't have counselors right now. So thinking about what our bilingual staff look like to try to facilitate not only the students but their families to appropriate services to get them adjusted and transition in as quickly as possible.
Okay. Bruce?
Just for what it's worth, this has never happened before. I think what we're experiencing here in Norwalk is at our level is also happening at the college level also. For the first time, it seems that NCC kind of ignored its own add-drop rule And on the first day of class, I had typically 12 students, and I expected a couple more to enroll by the second class. And each class it went up, and they allowed students in the fourth class. It's like basically the second week of school, or the third week of school. I had 22. Nothing like that has ever happened. Overall enrollment is slightly down in NCC. So I found the whole thing kind of interesting, and this sheds it, puts it in, possibly provides a reason for what's going on. I haven't gotten to know the kids that well yet, or, what their circumstances are, but never happened before, nothing even close. All right?
I know maybe it's too early because this is preliminary data, but is this an urban phenomenon, or is this across all 19 school districts?
No, there are only a few places where an immigrant can live. So those would be the cities where you have housing that can accommodate immigrants, or where there's a family already living, but it's, you can't live in New Canaan or Westport or any of those places because there's no housing at a reasonable level. They're very exclusionary, and so I think that's one of the issues our state is facing, that this becomes an urban issue and an urban phenomenon.
Thank you.
So, I always bring it back to the per pupil expenditure, because that's really a very powerful benchmark to understand what we're able to do, what our opportunity is to provide services for our kids. We know that we're adding a percentage for the ELL students over and above our regular per pupil expenditure. So when you talk about adding 100 students, that's, $2 million with the extra added percentage cost. So are we going to talk about how that reallocation happens? Are we going to ask for a special appropriation to deal with this? I mean, hopefully the federal funding comes through, but if it doesn't.
So the number of new ELLs is, the mayor had mentioned 300, 350 into the cities. We're estimating 350. The 100 on top of that is simply our normal enrollment growth between June and September, consistent with our enrollment projection. So if you add those two together, it's 450. That's really the number we have to be dealing with. So, there is, this is where the research intersects with the need, right? We know that the most effective method is dual language instruction. The least effective is ESL. Throughout the state, there are only 4 dual language schools in the entire state of Connecticut. We happen to have one. We will probably need, over the years, to develop a second school or a second program on the other side of town. Schools like, Kendall is going to be in a different mode, but schools like Jefferson, where you have, a very large number of EFL students, would be candidates for that. We are going to have to revamp our services. I think we saw this coming, to the extent that, that's why you have that workshop in November. There will be budgetary implications. We are going to try to get through the year with the resources by reallocating the resources we have, but clearly there are going to be implications for the following year and beyond.
May I ask a question related to that?
Of course, Bruce.
When you do the budget reconfiguration, when you calculate the budget for next year, make the adjustments this year, I often have questions about, I like per pupil expenditures. I think it's the best way to compare districts, and you get an overall view of what's going on in the district. But when you actually working within the overall framework, to me it seems like, and I think we discussed this last year during the reconciliation project, the key number is roughly about half of the overall per pupil expenditure. It's what we allocate to each school per student, because we don't have to maintain an additional ball field if we have 10 more students, things like that, or our electricity costs may not go up. So when we do calculate the adjustments for this year and for next year, we basically base it on the average of about roughly $8,600 a year for our per pupil allocations. Because once you get into, if you're not careful, you start talking of 17,000, 18,000 per student, and the public starts to get very nervous. Whoa, wait a minute. When in fact, it's somewhere, because of the special needs EL, it's somewhere in between that. Probably when you do the appropriate calculations for dual language and stuff, it's somewhere probably between 9 and 95, if you ask me.
For the English language learners, it's approximately a third more.
Okay,
According to the state.
Well, that's a state average cost, yeah.
so you're about 11.
So in the budget preview you had at the retreat, we did exactly that. We used the SBB figure as opposed to the per student allocation. Per student allocation, we hold central, special ed, and ELL services, as well as some of the big ticket items like the 10 million for transportation. So it's probably, I think to most people, it is more of a fair allocation to use the money the school would actually get as opposed to the entire, because again, we're not adding administration. There is an economy of scale here, and I think we're in complete alignment with your thinking on this.
But at the same time, I would just bring up, if we have whatever it is, 150 to 300 students, let's say it is 300 students, that's 10 plus teachers.
Well, it has to cannibalize other services,
And,
right?
you know, a teacher, even if you could get a, first year teacher plus benefits, that's $75,000. So there's there's $750,000.
We've already put on 5 additional sections at Norwalk High School. You'll notice that Norwalk High School is one of the schools that has quite a few, has an influx of more students. And so, that's like 100,000 that we've spent. We've taken that out of that reserve teacher amount in the budget. So we're going to be getting very close to the edge on that very, very soon. But again, we'll try to we'll try to stay within our current budget.
And last year, we had an influx in January as well, so we could get a second wave.
Possibly. Last year, we had the biggest growth was between April and June. And I had that written down somewhere. Oh, yes, we had 57 new ELLs between April and June last year.
Okay, well.
Okay, so more you'll get more on this at your October meeting. And again, I think what we're looking for here at this point is just to get students settled in school and get some firm numbers and be able to provide additional services. I just wanted to report very briefly, you are aware that one of the priority implementation steps you're voting on tonight deals with Nathan Hale and Cranberry schools, which have been underperforming relative to their income level and number of high-need students over the past several years. And we're determined to support those schools to achieve at a level that which is their certainly their potential. I wanted to just report on a few initial steps in that regard. First of all, I've asked Brenda Myers to take on the responsibility of advisor to Cranberry School this year. That means she will be evaluating the principal and will also serve as the school's thought partner in terms of its improvement steps. Sandra Fayos will do the same for Nathan Hale School, will be the evaluator and also thought partner and a supervisor of the school. I and other staff met with the faculty of each school on the Friday and Monday respectively before school started. And to explain what we were doing, what we were going to attempt to do and how we would attempt to support them, but also to deliver the message that, change is everyone's responsibility. And, while we can involve people in change and help them determine the change, we can't protect them from change, and we cannot go on the way we are with the status quo. I think both faculties were remarkably enthusiastic about this process and recognize that they can do better and the school should do better, and that there are things that everybody needs to do differently going forward in the future. In an effort to support both schools in that regard, we have formed a partnership with Mass Insight. Mass Insight is a think tank in Massachusetts. They were the authors of the Turnaround Challenge, which is this very famous report a decade ago on successful school turnarounds. And since that was commissioned by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it continues to be kind of the Bible of how you should go about improving or turning around a school. They have since developed a process which they call root cause analysis that they work through with the faculty of each school. Everybody is involved, everybody is interviewed. I've given you some material here that describes that, and then it leads to development of a school improvement plan with the staff. And at that point, everybody has ownership of it. But you have an objective party that's guiding this. And we thought that was important in this case. We did not want finger pointing between teachers and administrators or parents and everyone else, because there's no blame here. This is a systems problem. And when you have a systems issue, everybody is responsible and everybody has a part in addressing it. So we will start first with the root cause analysis work at Nathan Hale later this month. Cranberry will start in December because they are in the process of implementing this thinking maps paradigm that they're working with Dr. Myers on, which is responsive to their data. So we're looking forward to this process. And again, I was very impressed by the response of both faculties to it, and I think we're all going to be enthusiastic until we're actually faced with the change. We'll all be enthusiastic about studying it and then hopefully doing it once we have a plan.
Right. Yes, Bruce?
In my experience, which is dated, having the words root cause analysis and school improvement plan in the same sentence is almost a contradiction in terms. Root cause analysis is exactly what it is. Historically, school improvement plans were probably about this thick, tiny type, sat on shelves or on teachers' drawers or desks, and it was just too detailed, too amorphous, the opposite of what a root cause analysis would be. And you mentioned school improvement plans. I'm assuming that they've changed over the years. Thank you, Julie. But they used to be something that was mocked by comedians. That's how, you hand the teacher something this thick, what's the teacher supposed to do? So my assumption, according to someone who knows this stuff, is I feel good about that.
No, when you read this material, you'll see that they recommend focusing on 3 to 5 things, right? That's all. But the root cause analysis is to identify what those 3 to 5 greatest levers would be.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just want to make sure that the public understands and the folks who are running for the board understand the difference between, Cranberry is by no means a failing school in the sense that its objective scores are actually quite high. It's the differentiation between the income levels and where those scores lie that causes the concern. I do have a concern about spending resources in a school that is already pretty successful when we have some schools that really are struggling. So while I think there's lots of work to be done in all of our schools. I'm supportive of this effort and interested to learn more about what is planned for Cranberry. I did need to register sort of some concern that it, is being labeled as a failing school when it by no means is a failing school.
No, I think we've tried to use the term underperforming consistently. So using Cranberry as an example, it has the lowest number of high-needs students.
Correct.
Presumably, it should be the highest performing school.
When we discuss an equity audit situation,
And so it's in third or fourth place
we're putting,
behind other schools that have much higher percentages of
we're
high-needs
putting
students.
resources where maybe they aren't as needed as most.
I mean, I think if you want the district to move forward, these schools have got to be at their appropriate level of achievement. So, okay, so last item I have to report on, this is really just finishing up the goal that we had for last year. You remember there was a initial report 2 years ago that showed that our teacher absence rate was higher than the state average and unreasonably high at some schools. That was reported to you by Sharice Sherry. When Javier Padilla came on board, he did another report, but this one contained recommendations. We've been working those recommendations, and we're pleased to report officially that the absence rate has now come down to slightly below the state average, which is where we always want it to be, but there is still more work to be done. And so, Javier, I'm going to ask you to just briefly review this, final report with the board.
Okay, thank you. It seems like it was just a little while ago that we were doing this update, and it's been almost a year since I was here. So quickly, just want to remind us of the purpose of this particular mandate, which was really to look at three things. One, understand absenteeism within the district and specifically at each of the schools, and then compare that to the state average and really assess what were the sort of patterns that we were observing in terms of those absences. Clearly, when we don't have teachers here, there's significant direct and indirect impact. And so we have to pay attention to it, right? It's when you have scarce resources, you have to be careful how you're utilizing those. And when we don't have our teachers here, we're spending quite a bit of dollars in other resources. And the other piece why this is so important is because we know that teacher absences lower student achievements. There's a direct correlation between teachers being here and their students' academic performance, and so we have to sort of stay on top of this. So this is the third school year that we're sort of looking at the data, and we're looking at the data from two perspectives. One is to look at the average day of absences for our students compared to the state averages, and then really going a little bit deeper and looking at what's considered chronic absences. So that is defined as teachers who are out during the school year for 10 days or more. And so you'll see that detail here. So as Dr. Adamowski alluded, the good news is that over the past 3 school years, there has been a decline in absences. We have consistently been decreasing the average number of days on teacher absenteeism. When we first did the report, there was an average of 10.3 days, and this past year, we were down to 7.9. So what we calculate in these absences are sick days and personal days. So this does not include any absences that are approved through some sort of family leave, sick time and personal time. As you can see with Brian McMahon and Norwalk High, they went down. They dipped a little bit last school year, but still remain below the state average. Brian McMahon with 7.2 FTE days missed, and Norwalk High just below the state average at 8.1. We also saw a decline in 3 of the middle schools. Nathan Hale, Ponus Ridge, and Rowton all went in the right direction, although 2 of those are above the state average, Nathan Hale and Ponus Ridge. West Rocks went up a little bit, but still remains at 7.4 below the state average. So you'll see here we have the state average, and then we have the district average for each of those school years. And in the elementary schools, similar story where we had 2 schools go down. One went slightly up, but still below the state average. And then we have 3 who are a little bit above the state average: Fox Run at 8.3, Jefferson at 8.5, and Kendall at 8.9. In Marvin, Rowayton, Silvermine, again, direction going down. Merrimack increased significantly, and Tracy and Wolf Pit also went up and are above the state average.
Do you know what happened in Merrimack? Any idea?
We are actually meeting with the leaders this Thursday to start digging specifically at their data to see what's going on with those particular schools. We try to look and see what were sort of the patterns in terms of days of the week. Friday remains to be, one of those days where we have a spike in absenteeism. I think the difference with this last school year is Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays became a bit more even. In the past, Tuesdays and Wednesdays were sort of low, and Thursday, those all sort of went up. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, Javier, thanks. I'm sure this mimics all sectors of life, but I think one thing we do need to look at more in the future as a data point are also days adjacent to holidays, right? So, okay. And that's going to vary throughout the year, but to understand where the 4-day weekends are coming in, right? If it's a Thursday or a Monday on top of a Friday, et cetera.
Mike, can I?
Oh, yeah.
Are you done, Brian?
Yes,
Sorry.
thank you.
Thank you. If I could just piggyback on what Brian's saying, Stephen, you probably can answer this as well. For employees, let's say it's whatever holiday it may be, Thanksgiving break, do many of our staff members, do they need to get prior authorization in order to take a day off prior to a long weekend or a long holiday? I'm just wondering with some of these days if there's a peak because some are taking days off prior to like
If you're calling in sick, no, there's no authorization.
Let's say if it's a personal day?
If it's a personal day,
It should be approved.
yes,
by the leader.
you have to have that approved in advance. You don't have to give the reason, but you have to say you need a day on this particular date. I don't think many people use personal days before a holiday. I think
curious to see.
this is more in the area of calling off sick.
On Fridays.
Or a day before a holiday. We'll have to look on the day before a holiday.
I'm just curious
I'm
to
not sure
know.
how prevalent that
Yeah,
is.
because I mean, it could be obviously extenuating circumstances, but I'm wondering if there's any way we can track that to see if there's a pattern, not all the time, but if there is, depending on
We'll
the
have to look at
holidays.
that.
And it could be long, you're going away for a longer period of time, but I'm just wondering if that's the norm or if that's something that's happening more frequently.
We can look at the data. I can tell you that for the very first time, I think last school year, we were actually much more involved in working with leaders in declining personal days than I think we had ever had in the district. So I think leaders are starting to understand that they can approve personal days and they can decline personal days.
Thank you.
Okay. Bruce, Go ahead, Javier.
Okay, well,
I'm
and
sorry,
so.
when you're done with this slide,
Okay.
though, I'd like to ask.
So, and this is the month slide. So again, we see that May is a very, very busy month for people to be out absent.
Right, so May is a long month, you know, other months are shorter because of vacation, so I think this slide's nice, but it would have a lot more power if you had it normalized as a function of school days available in the month.
We're actually working on it for our meeting on Thursday with the leaders.
That's also gonna move around, like
Right.
holidays on the previous slide.
Like December only has 15 instructional days, so we have to look and see what impact that has.
Right, if you look at that, December's probably actually worse than May.
Right.
Yeah.
Javier, I'm also wondering if some employees or some staff are waiting to take some of their days, like maybe towards the end of the year, maybe because there's that long span and they're taking it towards the end, because there's a spike, especially in May.
So I think anecdotally, it's a
Yeah.
function of two things. One, people also save their days, and so towards the end of the school year, people are using more of those. And the Friday, what I've been told is because teachers are trying to not disrupt the instructional learning as much, they try to schedule things for the end of the week.
And I know a while back, Sharice, I know, had a presentation, this was quite some time ago. We spoke about an incentive program, just something where, you know, instead of waiting until you're using some of your days until the end, if there's some kind of incentive for staff. I know that that was discussed during a presentation.
Yeah, so the challenge that we have here is that people can simply just roll over days. You can accumulate a certain amount of days, and so people try to accumulate as much as they can, and then once they've reached that max, then they start using. So it would be interesting to consider some sort of incentive, and there are some school districts who have implemented incentives to sort of buy back a certain portion of those days, and so those are things that we may want to consider.
I think it would be great if we could look at some other districts to see best practices, what they've been using, what's been successful for them, what isn't successful. But I think, especially looking at this now, this monthly view, and then looking at May, you've got a lot of, all of our employees are very hardworking staff members, and they deserve their time off, obviously. But if there's such a peak, especially during that last month prior to when school ends in June, might behoove us to take a closer look at that and see if we can look at some type of incentive, which we've discussed before, but we've never actually worked on that.
How many days in Connecticut or Norwalk can a teacher accumulate over his or her career?
186.
186. And once you reach 186 days, let's say a teacher is never absent for X number of years, teacher reaches 186 days, then what happens?
When they leave the district, there's a payout.
The payout is based on 186.
Correct.
But if a teacher, there's no incentive to come to school after a certain point.
Right.
That can be a problem. Great music teacher I worked with, he felt it was kind of silly. He missed almost an entire last year of school. He had never been absent for I don't know how many years, but there was nothing in it for him. And he was worn out, he was retired, he was moving, and that was that. It cost the district a lot of money. Yeah, but it was a music teacher, okay? Didn't really care that much by then. And I always thought that capping it, I know that there's some provision in New York, you can actually start to lend other teachers. Let's say somebody misses let's say I have 200 days, I have 14 days to spare, and a colleague of mine misses for an accident or an illness, misses 15 straight days. Instead of them going into debt, I don't know how it works in Connecticut or Norwalk, going into a minus, somebody can, I could lend that, I could actually just transfer
Donate.
it over to the other person. Do we have anything like that?
We do not have a program where staff can donate. vacation or sick days for someone who really needs them. We did explore that option with the NFEP last year, but we didn't follow through on that. There were other restrictions. We have to look at the contract very carefully. But that is an option that we may want to consider.
Because at some point, I don't want to belabor the point, there's a cost-benefit analysis by cutting it off at 186 and then having to hire many more substitutes than you may normally would have hired. So it's something worth considering going forward.
Agreed.
Okay.
So here's the slide that just compares Norwalk versus the state average. As you can see, between 2013 and 2016, Norwalk was at or above the state average. The last couple of years, Norwalk has gone down. We believe when we get the 2018-2019 results, Norwalk will be lower than the state average. And then we looked at, this is the chronically absent teachers. So these are teachers who have missed 10 or more days. It's calculated in the number of hours, so not occurrences. And this just gives you the raw number of teachers in each of these schools who have been chronically absent. If we look at the next slide on page 14, this gives you the percentage of teachers based on the total number of teachers in that particular school.
Thank you for normalizing that there, because that's
So this
huge.
Yeah, it's helpful.
So this slide is extremely important. In fact, on Thursday, myself, Javier, members of the talent staff are meeting with the principals of these schools. And, we talk about root cause. We'll look at Nathan Hale, right? 45% of staff chronically absent. That's got to make a difference. And we're going to go over with these principals required procedures for them to follow relative to those teachers who have been chronically absent 10 or more days.
Bruce? As I brought up several years ago, I'll bring it up again. I think it's extremely important to somehow separate out, and I use two extreme examples. The one teacher who has a severe case of pneumonia and misses 14 days, and is only absent that one time the entire year, and the other teacher who misses 12 days, 12 consecutive Fridays, for instance, or 12 consecutive Wednesdays. Times absent is extremely important because schools have to plan. If someone is absent because of an illness, a car accident, or something like that, everyone knows what's going on. You plan for it, you guarantee continuity instruction. It's the here and there. So in my mind, in terms of academic performance and continuity, consistency of the curriculum delivery, the number of times a teacher is absent is extremely important. Now, I don't see it there. I don't know.
We need to capture the incidents, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
For me, of course, I immediately go to, when you have the classroom teacher out that often, you're missing IEPs and 504. Yeah, because the people aren't, subs don't know all of that.
Yeah, I agree with both points here, but I think, Dr. Adamowski, you mentioned that you're going to actually meet with many of our principals that are on here and some of the chronic absenteeism. I think that really just needs to be addressed, and knowing why, and, as Bruce had mentioned, whether it's every Friday, it's every 2 Fridays, it's every Monday, what is the reason? There might be personal issues. I think those are things that we really kind of need to delve into.
So my understanding is that the HR business partners have an analysis of that for
Correct.
each of these principles that we're going to be discussing on Thursday. So again, we want to have transparent data. There's no excuses. It is what it is. and we're going to focus on what to do about it.
And I also think what's equally important is having, I know many of our principals do, but having that relationship with their staff members, that they're able to talk if there's something that, it's a chronic illness, something that's happening, that dialogue is happening, and that employee, that staff member is able to speak to
That's
their
right.
principal honestly and just say, this is what's happening, and that's why I've been out. But I think the dialogue has to start with the principals and the staff members, and it has to be an ongoing, not waiting until we get these type of results at the end, but it should be ongoing.
You're
as
so
often
right,
as possible.
and that's why we're doing it
And that
at the
level
beginning of the
yeah.
year. Yep.
And that level of trust between staff member and principal is huge. I mean, really is paramount in trying to help to reduce this, higher than average absenteeism.
One final point, if I may.
Hold on, Bruce, 1 second. Julie, put her hand up.
Thank you. I think this slide is probably the most telling for me right now. And when I look at this in comparison to some of our student performance, and when we compare this in addition to student attendance rates, we did the math, I think, when Sharice first did the presentation 2 years ago. We did the math in students. When you combine student absentee rates with teacher absentee rates, we have kids missing over a year of instructional time over the course of their 12, 13 years in Norwalk schools.
Right.
And so, I'm glad we're making progress, that this is definitely a step in the right direction, but when we're actually looking at the data, we have a long way to go. And so I think root cause analysis is the right step. Looking at culture and climate in the building and the relationships between staff, but we also really need to look at what are the different levers and strategies that we can implement here. Some that may be no cost, some that may be low cost, some that may be higher cost, and figure out what that means, if it's incentives, if it's different approaches that we can do. In addition, if we know we have chronic issues in certain schools, are there ways that we can have better trained substitutes so that we're not losing that instructional time when we know there are teachers on a regular basis that are out?
Bruce.
Do we have any restrictions on the number of what I call self-treated days?
What do you mean by that?
You're absent, you come back, no questions asked, where you were, what happened.
Yeah, after the 5th day, we can request, and we have been requesting doctor's notes.
5th consecutive day or 5th absence?
5th
5th consecutive day out?
consecutive. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then they're required.
Mm-hmm.
In many districts, it's 3. If I'm absent one day and I bring back a note, is it considered self-treated? How do you work these? Some districts, they have certain restrictions on self-treated versus where you have to demonstrate you saw a doctor.
So they by contract, they are required. We can require them to bring a note after the 5th day. I don't believe many leaders are asking for that prior to the 5th day, and in some cases, not even after the 5th day.
So, oh, that's interesting. So I could be absent for a week, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, and I may not even have to explain to anybody
Depending
why?
on the school, we have to be on top of that. We have to remind leaders that they should be doing this.
Okay, I agree with you. If you have to remind leaders, perhaps the problem is a little bit more complicated than you thought.
Well, this is one
Well,
of the
like-
points for
right.
this meeting on Thursday with that group of schools,
Okay.
right? We have to enforce our current policies, and that's the expectation of the principal, to do that with the support of their HR business
Right.
partner.
Okay, I think we had a lot of questions, but it was a complicated topic.
Good, no, it's good.
Whatever you have left, Javier, do you want to summarize this?
Yeah, so just in quick summary, we're going in the right direction, but there's a lot of work that still needs to happen. And we really need to do this at the level to try to understand the culture, what's driving some of this. I think that will help us create some best practices that we can share across the district, but I think we really have to start at that level. And I think to a point that was mentioned earlier, we got to continue to implement and be consistent with our policies, the things that we currently can do that we have not been consistent across all of the schools throughout the district. So we are continuing to do that. We're doing this self-assessment on Thursday to really look at how do we work with these leaders to stay on top of on top of this very serious issue. And the other piece you'll see on my last slide there, we have to really promote wellness. If people really are out because they're ill, one of the things that we really need to explore is we work with kids who get sick very often and have a lot of germs, and we don't require people to get the influenza vaccine. You know, we may want to start thinking about some of these things that we can do to help reduce, you know, some of the absences. So these are just things to explore. And like I said, we're going to try to work with leaders to develop plans that are tailored and specific to their building based on their needs.
Do you, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Heidi.
Do you mean having, whether it's at one of our high schools, Norwalk High School, Brian McMahon, where there's like a flu day, where, you know, nurses are in and any staff members interested in getting a flu shot, it's covered under insurance, they go.
Correct.
I think if, it would definitely be of interest if you could check with other districts. I know other districts do that, and they usually do that once a year, so I think that would be a great way of starting, you know, especially during, you know, the flu season.
Right.
To have that, so I think many of our surrounding districts do offer that, so I think it's worth it if we can investigate that.
Yep.
And one thing to think about as we go into the, you know, cafeteria renovations to a year, I've had principals express to me that having a hand washing station at the cafeteria would greatly improve health statistics in their building, in their opinion, because that's when they're putting hands to mouth. So you wash before you eat, you wash after you eat, and hopefully there's less transmission, so.
Yep.
Right.
Good, interesting point.
Thanks. I just want to say quickly, this is excellent. And I think one thing you have missing from here also is the financial impact of this. And we have seen definite cost savings on the substitute lines. And I'm sure someone can quantify, but I can't imagine that instructional benefits aren't better from this. And I just want to thank you, and I really want to thank Dr. Adamowski, who sat down with me right after he onboarded, and I raised this issue as one of my most pressing issues to address, and, you know, 4 years has come a long way, and I look forward to more good work on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, that concludes my report. Thank you for your patience.
The whole night. We haven't even moved anything yet.
Superintendent, okay. Now, we will move, we'll start off with the consent calendar. And this is approval of personnel, this is hires, approval of budget transfers, which are budget transfers, and then approval for trips. And these are all within the consent calendar. Brian?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, second by Barbara Meyer Mitchell. Discussion? Any discussion?
There's no discussion.
You can only remove something.
Oh,
He's right.
You could only remove something.
from consent, otherwise just, you just have to vote. Okay. I guess the motion to, okay, all in favor? Okay, great, thank you.
Is Sarah voting, or?
Sarah had to get off.
Okay.
And we can call her to get back on if we want her to. I know 2 board members had a lot of questions on one of these field trips, and I did circulate an email. I hope everyone saw that. This is about the trip to Japan, and certain board members were concerned about the small number of students. Our current Japanese teacher, Eric Tischer, has been here since 2014. And he says he's always had small groups between 4 and 7 students. This year it's 3. And he also noted, which I think I might have mentioned to you all as well, I took a group of middle school students to Japan. I thought it was in 2000, I wasn't sure what year, but I think he said he thinks it's 2013. And there were only 3 students then. So they've always been pretty small groups, just FYI. Now we will move on to approval of the priority implementation steps and outcomes from the strategic operating plan. That is included in the packet. There are 27 different steps. Some of them are steps that are already underway. Some of them are steps that we want to get done in this coming year. Could I have a motion? With Dr. Kimmel, second. Julie Corbett, all in favor? Or any discussion? Sorry. No? Oh, Barbara?
I'm just, on point 1, what is the exact timing of when we want to engage these consultants this year? I'm just interested to know what the thinking is in terms of engaging the consultants before the new superintendent starts. Shouldn't we be doing that process with the new superintendent?
No, this is designed to be helpful to the new superintendent and new board members. So the way it's scheduled now, you remember how you changed your schedule with the SGCs? You moved it to May. So this is scheduled for the June workshop. Working backwards from there, my latest conversation with them after that adjustment was made, actually, we made 2 adjustments, and the other was your point on central office capacity. Did we have enough people to do what we're trying to do? So we expanded the study a little bit to include that as well. But they will do this in April and May, and have a report for you in June. And again, it would be designed to be helpful in development of the next strategic plan, helpful to the new superintendent, helpful to the new board.
But it's not actually developing that strategic.
Oh, no.
We'd be waiting. Okay.
No,
good.
it basically benchmarks, this is going to benchmark where we are, which is obviously a different place than we were 5 years ago. And based upon that benchmark, it should be helpful in determining, what are the next steps and what do you do to take it to the next level.
So then on point 18, I was wondering if we could have a report either in the superintendent's report or to the curriculum committee on the phase 2 of NGSS so that we, know more what we're endorsing. And then point 19, I'm wondering, does the K-12 literacy design include explicit multisensory teaching methods?
Well, that's a good question. You do not have any more workshop space available. I'd probably recommend that you would want to take those 2 items up within the C&I committee.
Okay, great. I just think we need a little, to expand on that, dig a little deeper. Mr. Barber.
Yes.
I just want to, one comment on this. I think one of the important things to remember is that these are, yes, supporting, assuming we all vote yes here, supporting the implementation steps. That said, several of these individual implementation steps require a further vote to fully implement and okay them. So I just wanted to clarify that for.
Excellent.
Okay. Yep. All in favor? Unanimous. And now we will, motion to approve the recognition of Hispanic Heritage Month, September 15th to October 15th. Jolie Corbett Chavez. And a second, Heidi Keys. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. We will now move on to policies first read. Heidi Keys.
Thank you, Mr. Barbas, Chairman Barbas. I'll start. We discussed these during our last policy meeting, and I'm just going to go over some of the highlighted areas. Frank, Dr. Costanzo is here, so he can jump in. I'll start it, Frank, and then I'll have you jump in. The first one, policy 3516A, these are all mandated policies, which we know from CABE. This was last adopted back in 1985, so quite a while ago. So we knew that we had to look at that from 1985. Business non-instructional operations, really having a safe and secure school facilities, equipment, and grounds. If you move down a little bit where it says number 1, it says involvement of local officials, including first selectmen. We don't have first selectmen, so we crossed that out. We added in chief of school operations and district school safety. If you turn that over to the back, couple paragraphs down where it states maintenance. We had put off or cut off buses and other vehicles used to transport students. There is also the district or its transportation vendor will develop maintenance plans for buses and other vehicles used to transport students. If you look on the next page, which is 3516C, if you move down to the end, under policy evaluation, we have principal, school health coordinator. Others shall regularly monitor, evaluate, and submit an annual report to the School Health Advisory Council Board. There is a typo, which I just noticed, Frank. It's got a Z. It should just be education/other. That's just a quick one that we can change. Also, I wanted to add, if you look at policy 41113, 42113, we had a great presentation from Javier, and I might have Javier jump in as well. This is also part of our priority implementation steps, 2019 through 20, number 25. Really, it's about minority recruitment and retentions. We've added in the retention. We had a presentation by Javier during our last policy committee meeting, and we spent really a good chunk, I'd say most of that hour and 20 minutes really on this policy, and Javier did present that to us. But you know, we're looking to employ a staff that proportionally reflects the demographics of Norwalk Public Schools population. We also added in, you know, there was a lot of discussion with policy members about many of our students in Norwalk that graduate and they move on. They decide to go for a degree in education. Where are those students? Like, what's happening? We have roots in Norwalk here. We want to be able to retain all the students that we have that are actually going for education. So we wanted to work on some kind of survey or something, and I know Javier was working and checking with other districts as well, because we want to keep these students. We want them to come back. They have roots here in Norwalk. They're living here in Norwalk. Once they graduate, where do they go? Do they go to other districts? We'd love for them to work at Columbus, to work at Silvermine, to work at Norwalk High School, Brian McMahon High School, Nathan Hale. We want to recruit, we want our students back here in Norwalk, and I know they'd be more than happy to be back in Norwalk. So we want to have another report. Javier is going to come back to policy as well, but also, even more importantly than that, bring it back to the full board, just like a similar presentation, Javier, that you had on absenteeism. We'd like something like that brought back to the board so we can look at that and add some information as well. But if we move down on this policy, where it's, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth paragraph, we crossed off superintendent of schools and added in chief talent officer. If you move down again, we also have chief talent officer as well. And I know Javier's put a lot of hard work into this, and we need to make sure that we keep adding and other things that we need to do to make sure that we get this right, especially, and we've highlighted minority recruitment, but also the retention, making sure that we get these students back. Frank, do you want to add on?
No, I would just, I would only say that we, and thanks to Javier for his good work, felt that it was important to add retention to this policy. You know, for all of the good work that the state is embarking on with regard to minority recruitment, retention is a key piece to all of this. It's important to recruit, but retaining is critically important. So I'm here to answer any questions if you have them. Our adjustments to the CABE recommended policy are in bold or in red font, and we're hopeful that this will go before the board a month from now and become part of our policy manual.
And I'm hopeful if we can have, for our next board meeting, if possible, since we'll be voting on this, if we can have a presentation to the board on some of the things that we discussed, Javier, I think would be really beneficial and helpful.
Javier spoke to the policy committee about the strategic work that the talent office has been doing to attract minority candidates to our district. We're at approximately 16% of our workforce is minority, but when you look at our certified population, that number drops. We have a higher minority proportion among our administrators, but our certified staff below the administrative rank stands at around 10 or 11%. So we're looking to increase that, obviously, as our demographics change in Norwalk.
Okay. I think that's it, right?
Yes,
Heidi?
that
Okay,
is.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next
Javier.
will be our year-to-date, fiscal year-to-date monthly financial report from our CFO, Tom Hamilton.
August year-to-date.
Okay, good evening. You do have a report for the month of August. The report, if you look at it, you'll notice it looks a little different from your standard report because the city controller has not yet rolled the fiscal year, and the reporting tool that we use through SQL does not work properly until the city has rolled the year. So we've given you a financial report which is prepared directly from Munis itself, so it doesn't have the year-over-year comparison. It's just provides budget to actual year-to-date as of the end of August by object code. Obviously, through August, before the start of school, there really isn't a lot to glean from this financial report at this point, because by and large, most of our expenses really hadn't started as of the end of August. They really kick in September. A couple highlights just to note. You'll see on the 330 account significant encumbrances of about $1.8 million, and also significant encumbrances on the out-of-district tuition account, the 563 account, of about $6.3 million. And I take that as a good sign that the Special Education Department, this is confirmation, if you will, that the Special Education Department is up to date in terms of getting contracts in place. And for those of you who were on the board from sort of the ugly days 4 years ago, you'll remember that those contracts didn't get in place until that first year that we were here. Until December, January, we were still trying to get contracts in place. So I think this is certainly a good indication that the system is working as it's intended to work. The contracts are in place and encumbered on the financial system. Again, I don't think there's anything much else to report on August. I would note that the Finance Committee did also review, and in your package tonight, you have the final printouts for June of last year, and also you have in your package the transfers for last year, the year-end transfers that in June you authorized the administration, the superintendent, to make transfers to close the books. So you have a list of all of those transfers in your backup material as well. The authorization that you provided in June delegated that authority to the superintendent with the provision that the information would be provided to the board, and that's why it's being provided to you. But if there are any questions about last year's results, financial results and budget results for 2018-19, I'm certainly happy to answer those as well.
Any questions? No? Okay. Thank you, Tom. Next, we will move to committee and representative reports. We'll start with Julie Corbett.
Sure. So I can update on the counseling redesign committee. We met last week for the first time this school year, and we will meet again this Thursday. We are moving towards recommendations. Couple final steps. There are still a number of focus groups going on with various stakeholder groups, as well as some surveys that are happening, especially with our student population, our high school student population, that all need to happen in the next few weeks before we finally develop the list of recommendations. We have talked about encouraging that list of recommendation comes with some multi-year phased approach, kind of trying to take a look at no-cost items, mid-cost or lower-cost items, and then what are the higher kind of dream big items, and trying to target. That said, some of the improvements we've already seen just by having the existence of the counseling redesign committee are already starting to prove fruitful. We had, there was professional development this summer that was highly attended, and feedback from the staff so far was that they felt it was extremely useful and a good use of their time and productive. So we're already starting to see some improvements and satisfaction with that work happening, and then we'll have the workshop in a couple of weeks with the recommendations from the committee.
That's great.
Julie, can I just piggyback, or actually not piggyback, ask a question as far as the redesign? what are we doing, and Javier might be able to answer this as well, if you have any teachers now, let's say they're teaching Latin or they're teaching math, whatever it may be in the high school, and they're thinking, wow, this change is great, we need this kind of change as far as the redesign of our counseling, and they're interested in applying. Are we working anything out for any of our existing teachers that are thinking, you know what, there might be an opportunity for me now to get more into counseling?
It hasn't come up.
Okay.
From the redesign committee.
Yeah.
There would need to be additional, usually the counselors have additional certifications.
Yes, and let's
so-
say that they do, or they're
Right.
going back to school and they're doing that. I know of one teacher that's quite interested in that, so I think that's something we might
That
want
might
to
have a better, yeah.
explore. I mean, I'm just putting that out there now, because I'm sure that there will be, and many that are certified for that as well.
So the very good news is the word of our work is getting out.
Yes.
So we did have 2 vacancies,
Right.
one leave of absence and one permanent replacement as Dan Sullivan moved into an administrative position. And for those 2 positions, we posted
Right.
and got 60 applicants, which is unusual for us here. In those high priority, difficult to staff positions, and many of them had been interns through the counseling program in both high schools, and we were able to hire someone. We also looked specifically for someone that could speak a second language or brought the wealth of diversity, and, we were very successful. So we would encourage people to go to school,
Right.
but the counseling programs have been very responsive to our recruitment needs.
I mean, the buzz is, many of the students I know are aware of it already, so I think that the important hype is out there, which is great, and I think the restructuring of this is so well needed, because we've talked about this many times where we've had students, you want the same counselor to work with you from 9th grade all the way up to 12th grade, especially being a parent now of a junior that we're going through the college, 3rd time now, through the college application, but having that consistency and that continuity and getting, just like we were talking about absenteeism, having that relationship with your principal and your staff, having that relationship with your counselor and your student from 9th grade all the way up to 12th grade is critically important for the success of that particular student, and having that one-on-one dialogue, whether it's in a group setting or it's individually. But I think having this restructuring is really paramount. It's very, very important. I'm glad that it's actually happening.
It's been great work.
The focus group. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, you bet. Great, thanks, Julie. Anything else? Okay, I guess next, I have a couple areas to cover. So the first one is the food service lead food team. We have a new food service provider, Chartwells, and I would say probably the easiest way is we've had a little bit of a rough start. I've had some really strong positive feedback, but at many schools they've had a slower time of getting ramped up. I will say, for example, breakfast is not hitting our goals. Our goals is more fresh fruits and multigrain, and it's a lot of sugary cereal, and we really need to work with them a little more. What we talked about, I was on the committee that reviewed the bids and interviewed the different companies, and they really had a great story when we awarded them the bid, but it hasn't been quite as smooth sailing as we might have hoped, but I think we're working on it and we'll get there.
Mike, are you saying like sugary, like what kind of sugary, like just Cheerios, not Cheerios, like sugar snacks?
I don't know how bad it is, but all I just know is, we were doing a lot of fresh stuff before, eggs even, and these take to go, and there doesn't seem to be
More
any
processed, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So we need to work on that. And, at certain schools,
Yeah.
salad bars, smoothie bars
Right.
aren't up and running yet.
Yeah.
So it's been a little frustrating, but, we got some time, and we hope we'll get there. On facilities, we had a meeting at the end of August. We'll have our September meeting in a couple weeks. We really just reviewed all the summer projects, so we never overlooked at any of the big projects, but there were dozens of small projects over the course of the summer that included everything from installing air conditioning at Roten and at Cranberry, We've come up with this plan. It's not full-fledged central, but it's a lot better than what we had, such that those schools now are considered air-conditioned. So if we had a heat wave, they wouldn't have an early dismissal. We had asbestos cleanup continue. We had a big environmental cleanup at Brian McMahon. So those projects, we got everything done we wanted to get done. The big project at Ponus Ridge for the STEAM schools moving along really well. It's the scale of it is really mind-boggling how big, and they really are making great progress. The Columbus at Ely project we are still working on. We have some ongoing challenges, but we're working on those. So I think all in, facilities we're generally on track, but we're not necessarily, every project is not exactly where we want it to be. And then last of all, I'm going to just throw this in here because it's a committee in and of itself, although a short-term one is the superintendent search. As everyone knows, Dr. Adamowski will be retiring next year, and the timing on all this works, we needed to start now. There's a survey on our website. It's there. It will be there till a given day in October, but it will be there for 7 weeks or something. October 7th. So you've got less than a month. We want as much feedback as possible, and what we're trying to develop right now is a profile for, what we want our next superintendent to look like. There will be forums. There will be one at Brian McMahon on October 2nd. This is for all members of the community at 6:30 p.m. There will be one in the community room of this building on October 3rd, also at 6:30. And on October 7th, there will be a Spanish language one facilitated by, completely in Spanish, not with a translator, but the Hazard Young Atia representative will be a fluent Spanish speaker. And that will take place on October 7th. We still haven't finalized the location, but we will be in South Norwalk somewhere. So please come to these forums. There will be specific forums for different groups of stakeholders. The ones I'm talking about are generally for the public, for parents. There will be separate ones for students. There will be separate ones for different groups of employees. And those will be announced through different channels in the coming weeks. And I think that's pretty much it. Yes, Bruce?
If I remember correctly, we will, as board members, we will have our own separate interviews.
Yes.
And we were encouraged and we agreed that it would be better if board members did not go to those forums. Is that correct?
That is correct. We did agree as a board that would not be appropriate. And so we've been requested by the search firm. This is national, the biggest search firm in the United States for these academic searches. We've made that commitment. And there will be one-on-ones. You should have all have, at this point, committed to an appointment with them during the next couple weeks. Okay? That's it for me on committee reports. Ryan?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Finance met last week. As Tom said, it was pretty dry, just accounting topics that night. Next month, October 10th, we'll have a little more, hopefully some analysis on a month's worth of food service revenue and expenditure, and so we can take a closer look at that as we need to, as Chairman Barbas mentioned. So looking forward to that, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, Heidi.
You're welcome. For policy, we discussed it. I think I went into a lot of detail as far as the first read. So we've already done the first read. Our next policy meeting will be on October 1st. We have a lot more policies, obviously, the continued audit recommendations. So we're still, Dr. Costanzo and I are still working on that, on what will be on for the next agenda, but we do still have quite a bit to go on that. And the delayed start times, Dr. Adamowski, we finished. The committee's work is done at this point. We had our last meeting, I believe, a few weeks ago. And there'll be, the committee's work is done, and then obviously it will be more focus groups and more discussions on this. I don't know if you wanted to add anything more on that.
No, I think this is in the hands of the C&I committee at this point for the forum that is planned, and then would be hopefully going to the board after that.
That's it for me.
Bruce?
All right, the Curriculum and Instruction Committee met earlier this evening. We had an interesting update. We ended the year with an update on our G&T initiative, and we began it with an update on the new year on our G&T initiative. And the details, things are moving just ahead as we planned. And what was interesting, if you step back and you look where we were, when we began this initiative, when we still called it academically talented, where students were getting the enhanced instruction maybe once a week or once every 6 days, to where we are now, it's a huge improvement. So we ought to feel good about that. We will continue to monitor it. In 2 months, we will have more data to work with and have some of our questions answered. We spent a lot of time talking about some of the issues that were raised at our August 20th workshop on school start time. Dr. Adamowski was there and some of the members of the task force. What I will do is send board members a memo tomorrow on what we discussed, some of the things we decided, and how we're moving forward. I will say, the issue of traffic, we had an interesting discussion on that, and I'll fill you in tomorrow on that. We discussed before school programs, particularly for elementary schools, after school programs, jobs, sports, and we will continue to monitor this. I want to again announce October 7th, there will be a public forum in this room. I hope the media that's here can help publicize it. We're doing everything we can. And as Dr. Adamowski said, we will probably consider this again in October. We also discussed our SAT scores. We broke them down beyond just high risk and non-high risk. We began to look at them through African American scores, Hispanic scores, and basically the state has a ways to go. Our scores have pretty much, they're fairly flat, to be honest with you, but we recognize that we still do not have a cohort taking the SATs that's had to complete high school curriculum, revamped high school curriculum. And until we have groups of students have gone through the full comprehensive high school curriculum, we're not going to get the kind of results, we've recognized this before, the kind of results expected. Added to that, we've got to look at the impact of the G&T reconfiguration. That should have an impact also going forward on our SAT scores. So we've got to be patient. We're around the same, we're basically close to where the state is on many of the benchmarks. And it's not, being a little bit over 1,000 is nothing to brag about for any state, even though Connecticut is one of the highest in the country. We all have a ways to go. We also discussed a brief overview of the instructional coaching. Dr. Myers gave us how they're going to deal with it this year, systematic way, different schools, different training, bringing in consultants to ensure that the instructional coaching in the schools is much better. That's something also to keep in something we will look into later in the year to see how it's working. Thank you.
So this morning, Norwalk Acts held its first convening of the year, discussing growth, which organizations aren't at the table yet that we need to be reaching out to and bringing into the work, but also a discussion of communication out to the community and making sure that the community understands what Norwalk Acts is doing and their part in that. They did a really interesting deep data dive this morning into the statistics of the students coming out of the Norwalk Housing Authority, which revealed a lot of interesting discussion points and action points to move forward. On October 17th from 5 to 6:30, they will have their basics launch to talk about their early education or early development initiatives. On November 13th at 8:30 in the morning, they will be holding a Connecticut Collective Impact Conference to be a more regional discussion of how we can mobilize to move communities forward and make progress in the areas that we focused on. And the next convening is on December 10th at 9 a.m. The PTOC is officially changing hands and meeting this week to go through that process. I want to personally thank Mike Byrne, who has been a rock for the PTOC. When I came on as a kindergarten parent 8 years ago, the PTOC had imploded and almost disappeared. And through the hard work of Akeisha Casimir and now Mike Byrne, it has stabilized and become a positive entity, once again advocating for the students of Norwalk. So he will be handing the reins over to Lisa Nuzzo. and supported by Shiloh Martin Adams as treasurer and Shamiz Shular, who will be their communications person. They're currently pushing out seeking parent and family input into the walkability survey that was generated out of the Norwalk Health Department to look at walkability near the schools. And I think that on their agenda, given the new permitting software and process that the mayor's office has started, they want to once again discuss a PTO volunteer handbook so that volunteer hours are used efficiently and effectively. CES had their first meeting of the year and welcomed Dr. Michael McGrath as the new special education director. And we're particularly excited to highlight the new Eastern Fairfield County Diagnostic Center, which some of our students are attending. It's very exciting, and I hope to do a site visit soon. They also have a really great new Artist in Residence program at the Regional Arts Center, which I think will generate some performances that people might be interested in attending, and I will certainly update. That's everything I've got.
Okay, and now we are down to board member announcements. You want to start, Barbara? Back?
Nothing to it. I think I've covered it all.
Bruce, Heidi?
No, not for me.
Brian?
No.
Yeah, real quick. Well, tomorrow night is my turn to cook, and lucky me, the West Rocks Middle School is having their food truck festival, so I'm all set.
What time?
5:30 to 8.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I don't think I have anything.
My son turns 3 on Friday, but otherwise.
Tacos, burgers, whatever they have.
Okay, we'd like to approve the minutes. Could I have a motion approved for the August 20th minutes? Heidi Keys, seconded by Julie Corbett. Any corrections? Barbara?
Page 2, paragraph 4, it says didn't match the demographics of the city, but I think it should read of our student population. Page 2, paragraph 10, it said dealing drugs. I think that should be having drugs, maybe. Page 2, paragraph 12 and 13, it should read restorative justice practice, not just restorative practice. Paragraph 12, I asked if we could reach out to Dr. Connor to learn more about his delivery model and budget, specifically. Page 4, paragraph 9 should read before August 1st, not after August 1st. Page 7, paragraph 6, full name Meyer Mitchell. And I noticed that we did not note how the vote broke down in the minutes, which I don't think is normal. So I'd like to note that the vote passed 5-1 and I was the vote against. Page 10, please note that I was the abstention. And page 11, paragraph 10, it should read Norwalk Acts. It says Norwalk, not Norwalk Acts.
Question, do we have a policy on minutes? Do we name the votes? Who voted?
I believe we might. I don't recall that we didn't, put it that way. I do know minutes are not verbatim. We've had many battles in my time on the board about this. But votes, that is the point of minutes, is to track the votes.
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor with corrections as stated? Okay, then unanimous. And now can we go to the minutes of September 3rd?
I didn't see them attached. Did I miss them?
They're at the bottom of the packet. It's above the financials.
I'd like to move to table till the next meeting.
Okay, well, they were just a workshop, but no problem. I'm happy to do that. No one care? Are you happy to postpone? Okay.
It's fine.
Then we will delay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn. Brian, Heidi, all in favor? Good night.
Thank you, everybody.